67, borrowing for Driscoll School, if it had passed, and number 68, borrowing for Baldwin, if it had passed. The moderator has indicated that he will accept some motions under those items. And then finally, there's Article 10, which was meant to be a placeholder about the purchase of the Newbury College property, and there may be some discussion that the moderator will allow under that one. So.
Association. I think I would be rude if I didn't just take a small opportunity to introduce the other members of the association who are here. First of all, the president, George Abbott White, Dr. White, and Harry Friedman is here. And I saw Ernie someplace. And Susan Cohen, is she here?
Susan is here.
Okay, so all four of the officers are here. I welcome you and thank you for showing up. As Betsy indicated, our first speaker is the new chair. And I should say, maybe I'm off by saying, but the first Black chair in the history of the town, of the select board, Mr. Bernard Green. I don't think you need any further introduction.
If you said any more, maybe people wouldn't like me. Okay. As Arthur said, I'm Bernard Green, new chair of the Board of Select Persons. You can either congratulate me or give me your condolences, as will become clear as our discussion proceeds. Let me just say that here in Brookline, we have some really big challenges. I put them in two categories for purposes of our discussion tonight. Number one, the schools. Overcrowding, which is real. Okay, it's real. There may be a downturn at some point, but to think that Brookline is not going to be a growing town in the Boston area, given the financial sector, the biopharmaceutical sector, medical sector, et cetera, I think just is wrong. Many of the people that we're anticipating in our projections haven't even been born yet. And those are the kids who will be entering our kindergarten in 5 or so years. So our challenges in terms of overcrowding, and what is particularly important and actually unfortunate is how that overcrowding is impacting kids who are most vulnerable in our schools, kids with disabilities who need extra assistance and extra room in our facilities so that the services that they're provided are available. I would say that we have other challenges too. Second challenge, and I'm going to be very controversial here, you can yell and scream at me if you want, fine. I think this town has a problem of divisions. During the override campaign, as I said last night, I just want to read what I said last night, we face the challenges of resolving the divisions in our town that in unnerving ways reflect the divisions we see nationally in America. These divisions, like on the national level, express themselves as rigidity, absolutism, and self-righteousness, oftentimes expressed by people who may be motivated by laudable goals. In making that observation, I accept that me and all of us on each sides of any issue must look in the mirror and make sure that we don't exhibit those traits. But it's important that we recognize that that is a stumbling block in this town. And I think we need to think that through and figure out how we can avoid letting that impede our progress going forward. In terms of a update, I'll give you as much as I can say. A lot of things are just so tentative right now that I'm not willing to go out on the limb and say this is going to happen. But in terms of an update, the title of my update is called Nothing's Cheap. Okay. Let's start off with Newberry. We hope to be able to acquire the entire campus. How much is that going to cost? Well, it could be pretty steep. Maybe we can beat them down because we have a lot of leverage, but that leverage also comes with a cost. Newberry is under pressure to resolve their situations by selling their campus as soon as possible because, among other things, they're under a civil investigative demand by the Attorney General's office. So the AG is basically on them like a hawk. And what they can do is limited, and the expectations of the Attorney General is that they make a quick resolution of their situation is very high. They need to move fast, and they are using high cost law firms in order to help them out, and their trustees are under pressure because as a trustee of a private college like this, if they run out of money, and they may be running out of money, those trustees may have to come out of their own pocket with covering certain costs. So they're under a lot of pressure. That gives us leverage, but it doesn't guarantee anything. Because, number one, we can't offer them pennies on the dollar. The Attorney General is looking over our shoulder as well as theirs. So it's going to be costly. And the question is, where is that money coming from? We could pay cash for a certain amount, or a piece of the property, for example, but that's going to hit our CI capital improvement program pretty hard. So that's a trade-off. We could do an override, and if we buy the whole thing, we're going to have to do an override, and that's another factor in the equation, and whether Newberry is able, or not only willing, but able to wait the period of time that we could put together a competent override. So at any rate, Newberry is going to be very expensive, not cheap, because it's not just the cost of the land, but whatever we put there. I mean, some people want to put a school. I don't know if that's a good idea, but there's some scenarios in which a school at Newberry could make sense, but that's a school that's going to be costing, in addition to the cost of the land, a huge amount of money. So, not cheap. We also have opportunities at Maimonides, a beautiful school, absolutely beautiful school. And that, unlike Newberry, unlike any of the buildings at Newberry, that is move-in condition. I mean, it's really a nice location, nice building, it's well maintained, its roof and probably some of the other systems are reaching the end of its lifespan, but still, I mean, it's a great opportunity, and they're talking about leasing for a period of time. Not a long period of time, but could really help us out, at least as a transitional matter. But again, I don't know what we're going to end up offering in terms of rental rates, but it's not going to be cheap. I can tell you, if you ever seen the inside of that building, you know it's not going to be cheap. It's a large building, but it's not really large in terms of our school needs. And in terms of the way it's laid out, it doesn't really satisfy the needs of our K to 8 school program. It's a school for K through 5. It doesn't have the middle school facilities, and those are very important, especially today, where we have kids, where we provide science learning and other learning that requires specialized spaces that this school, unfortunately, does not have. I mean, but it is a beautiful school, let me tell you that. But not cheap, that's the message. And then Driscoll. As you probably know, I've made this statement quite a few times that I'm not willing to support paying $108 million for 10 new classrooms. Now, there may be other ways in which we can do a Driscoll project, but as it's currently formulated, that is, in my opinion, not very prudent. Are there other options? Well, maybe a 5-section school at Driscoll, but that creates other problems, and that's not going to be cheap either. Whatever we do at Driscoll, again, not at all cheap. We haven't really got to the point where we can say this is the way that we're going to move with respect to Driscoll or any of these other issues. My approach has been always after the election to say, let's step back, take a deep breath, and figure out a good solution, not just for one community, not just for one part of the problem, not just for one thing, but for as a global solution that will last beyond the next fiscal year. So those things aren't cheap. What is cheap? Well, nothing's cheap. But we're up against the wall right now, and that may mean that we have to look at what we own, what we already own, and we own a lot. We own a few things. We own Old Lincoln. Think about that and figure out what your views of that are. We own Baldwin. That's a school, and if necessary, we would use it as a school. Well, through the CIP or whatever, but not going to let that building sit there and gather spider webs. It's being used for things now, but it can be used much more usefully for the district. I think, of course, this is for the school board to determine, but I think that is a facility that we need to get maximum value out of. And also associated with the Baldwin project is we own 3 townhouses, condominiums, next to the Baldwin school that are pieces of property that could serve some purpose with respect to the schools or the town. So those are pieces of property that we own. And as we figure out what our next step is those factors, the very expensive options that we're going to have to think through very carefully, as well as the relatively cheap options of using buildings that we own in order to address some of our problems. I know at a certain level that's a little vague. I acknowledge that, but we're not at the point of having definite plans in terms of how we go forward to address the problem that we still have. The election didn't erase that problem, and that is overcrowding and the substandard spaces that we embarrassingly use for our kids, particularly kids with disabilities. That's all on my list of things to talk about. So I think you wanted me to answer questions. I know that there's one issue that'll come up. Bring it on.
My only concern is that when you come up right here, you can line up here. If you have a question, can you please limit it to 2 minutes? Ask a question rather than make a presentation. And we have a timekeeper, Lee Cook-Childs, who's right here, who will flash a card to you to let you know. So I'm just going to start off just very quickly, if that's okay. So where and why is Maimonides moving? Or do you know that?
Well, what I know and what I think public record is that they're unlike us. Right? We're gaining students; they're losing students apparently. So, from what I understand, this is public knowledge. They're trying to consolidate their operations. They have 2 buildings in Clark Street area. They're trying to consolidate their operations. They may have other plans. They're working on a strategic plan, and they'll probably come up with their ultimate decisions. But right now, they just have excess space, and they want to get out of that excess space because I'm sure it's costing them a huge amount of money.
Sure, right here. Sure.
Why don't you just ask from the seat?
Ken Lewis, Precinct 11, and member of the...
It's on TV.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
I would have worn a tie.
Bet you didn't know.
Good evening, Ken Lewis, Town Meetings. Good evening.
Better.
Thank you. Ken Lewis, Precinct 11 town meeting member and a member of the Brookline Teen Center. Bernard, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just wondered how much the Teen Center has factored into your thinking about temporary alleviation of overcrowding at Pierce, and in particular with regard to music and physical education classes.
That's really a question for the school committee, and we're way far away from coming to an answer there. I mean, the schools do rent space from the teen center that's very valuable and necessary because of the conditions at Pierce. But whether we would continue using that space or find other space in some of the options that we have that I mentioned is something that's far down the road. We're not really in a position to, at least I'm not in a position of saying one way or another. And again, that's really an issue for the school committee to struggle with and come up with an answer for. But we all appreciate the teen center.
Could you tap that to make sure?
It's working.
Anyone else?
Okay, I'm leaving. Uh-oh.
John, can you come up here, please, so that you can go to the mic?
I'm only asking because Bernard asked for it. Okay. I didn't want you to leave this.
What did I ask for this? Thank you.
I'm just going to fill people in a little bit first. I think this is the question he was asking for. I'm John Van Scorik, Precinct 13 town meeting member. And last night there was a presentation right here by an attorney for the litigants in the Baldwin case. And he took 3 minutes here at the beginning of the select board's meeting, to advise people of something which he said raises serious concerns as to whether there was a failure to disclose information relevant to the vote that we took on May 7th. And to sum it up, what he disclosed is that there was an email sent by the National Park Service to Brookline Town Council. It was received on April 15th, which you'll note is 3 weeks approximately from the election. The email contains very specific information expressing the view of the National Park Service that there are serious problems with the Baldwin site and the building that is proposed for the site. And I won't get into all the legal technicalities, but the bottom line of the email is that the plans that had been presented to date for a Baldwin school, and this includes 4 different versions of a building plan, would be likely to fail to get clearance from the National Park Service, in large part because they incorporate, was basically the wing that is included in the plans goes over Oak Street, and in the determination of the National Park Service, the very nature of a wing of a building going over Oak Street that then makes the Oak Street access to the park non-public. Their view is that the public would be likely to perceive that this is not a public park because you have to go under a wing of a building with oncoming cars that are dropping off kids or picking up kids. And his most important point wasn't so much what this says about the merits of the litigation, but to raise the question of why this email that was sent to the Brookline Town Council's office on April 15th was not shared with the public, who were about to take a vote on whether to go forward with the Baldwin plan. I don't have to remind you, at a cost of about $83 million. So the question is, why wasn't it disclosed to the public? And thank you for being patient with my asking the question.
Like I said, bring it on. Okay, 2 parts to that question. Number one, 2 parts to that question. First part, why it wasn't disclosed. Well, that's a good question. I didn't know about it. Neil didn't know about it. Julie has asked school committee members whether they received a copy of this email, and it looks like none of them have. We're still checking out, whether anyone actually received a copy of that email. I told Mel that he needs to sit down with Jocelyn and find out what happened, because I agree that that is an outrage that we did not hear about that email before the election or at any point, because we were making representations that we had addressed the reasonable issues that the National Park Service would have with respect to the use of the Baldwin Playground, access to the park, and not, intruding on the public's ability to use that. That's the first part. The answer is we're looking at what happened, because there's clearly a breakdown. We didn't hold anything back. And in fact, we were representing that we were still waiting for the National Park Service to respond, not knowing that on April 15th they had responded in a certain way. I think let's be careful about our analysis of what their response was. And because I anticipated this and provoked the question, I brought along the email that the National Park Service sent. And what they, and the relevant part is they talk about the conceptual plans for the schools. It says the conceptual plans limit or change access by relying on access through the town-owned Sewell Recreation parking lot, which is not part of the LWCF boundary area and not a permanent public access. So what does that mean? We're not talking about access, to the school through Sewell, and whether people use Sewell parking to get access to the park is kind of irrelevant, because they may be doing that now, and we can't stop them now or at any other point. Secondly, accessing the playground from Heath Street along Oak Street under an elevated school building may lead to the perception that the site is no longer available to the public. I find that we can put up signage. We talked to the state representative for the National Park Service. Signage was an issue that came up. The plans were to make that an easily accessible way under the building to the park. If there are other issues that could be discussed in terms of the height of that access or whatever, in terms of sidewalks, for example, we were still in the process of discussing that with the National Park Service. So, that's not an issue that is in any sense definitively addressed here. Additionally, third point, conceptual plans show Oak Street as the entrance exit for vehicles to the school, which would result in a significant increase in traffic that would further impact the public's ease of access to the site. Well, that's sort of the same situation we have at Longwood Park with the Lawrence School. I mean, that makes no sense to me. Now, people can disagree, but here's a key point in this email. And this is what I think a lot of people are missing, and what Dan Goldberg, who's not the representative of the litigants in the lawsuits, he's the lawyer for Bob Kraft. Now, how he gets into this, other than reaching out to the Trump administration to respond this way, I don't know. But the lawyer representing the litigants is Stephen Wall. So the key point is, in this email, we know that this project is still in the early planning stages, and hope that voicing these initial thoughts will help as plans progress. Please let us know if you have any questions. Two things about that. Number one, the National Park Service is acknowledging that we're still in the preliminary planning stages, and they want us to know the concerns they have now so that we can address them. Number two about that sentence is, and let me not go too deep into this, but that's something that we really, really should have been told about. We should have gotten this email as soon as it came in. We're trying to find out what happened. Because that line tells us that these are the things that the Baldwin Building Committee need to look at in order to satisfy the National Park Service, as we do I have one minute too? As we finalize our plan. So, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm pissed, frankly. And, we'll figure that out. But this email is not, if we had won on the Baldwin override, this email is not to brush that. And you can, I'll let people look at it. If you think that my analysis is wrong, but to me, what this email says is keep us involved or keep us informed as you go through your planning so that we can, identify issues that we're concerned about. We can talk about them. You can make adjustments to you meaning the Baldwin School Building Committee, make adjustments to your plan to accommodate our concerns, but it is not saying that, you can't use this playground. You can't use this playground for public school children to play on their public school playground, which is currently used, not by a lot of people, but is used by daycares and private school kids.
Bob? Yes. Speak into the microphone if you can. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Bob Weintraub. I'm a new town meeting member from Precinct 9. And this may not be the right forum to say what I'm about to say, but since there's people here, hi Carol, I'm going to say it. So in listening to the arguments for or against Newbury as one of the solutions, I actually was up there. I walked through with Rich Nangle. I understand what Rich was talking about, the fact that we did our walkthrough during the campaign. I was impressed with Newbury. It's a beautiful, beautiful campus. I thought it was in good shape. It's got a lot of open space. It's beautiful up there, parking, etc. The one concern that was expressed about Newbury is that it's close to Runkle and it's close to Heath. And so there would be some serious redistricting necessary if we considered Newbury as the ninth school. So this is not my original idea, but the problem with Newbury as a district school, which would cause all sorts of redistricting, can be remedied by a couple of things. By making Newbury a town-wide school. And you can do that in a few ways, and I'll just throw out a couple of ideas. And one of the ideas is obviously the Brookline Early Education Program, BEEP, needs a home. That's possible for Newbury. But in addition to that, we could put all of the kindergarten children who require rides to their schools because they're little kids. So we can make it a pre-K campus by doing some work up there. But I think that would create enough space in the district schools to accommodate all of the kids. So that's one idea. Make it a pre-K campus at Newbury. I don't think the cost would be that great. Secondly, something we've never considered in Brookline is the concept of a magnet school. I once worked in Lowell, Massachusetts, and I was actually the founding principal of a K-8 magnet school. I'm not saying to do a magnet school K-8, but the concept of magnet school is you make an attractive educational program that people then choose to send their children to. And again, that would create a town-wide, it would not require redistricting because people from all over the town could choose to send their kids to a performing arts magnet or to a STEM magnet or whatever thematic curriculum we can think of. We're pretty smart here. I think we can come up with ideas that parents would say, yeah, I want my kid to go to that magnet school. It could be 5 through 8, it could be K through 8, it could be K through 5. There are possibilities there. So I just want to, at this moment say, without building a ninth elementary school, there are ways, if we could buy Newbury at a reasonable price, there are other educational possibilities that would be very attractive, I think, and that would provide the spaces and the seats in the 8 remaining elementary schools. And I hope that Driscoll could be renovated and made into another beautiful school. I think it's pretty old. Carol, I haven't talked to you about that, but I'm in favor of going back to the voters and having another vote on Driscoll as well. Thank you very much.
I think these are good ideas. Using Newbury for BEEP, I don't have the exact numbers, but the cost compared to our current rentals,
Go ahead, please.
the cost, where was I? Where was I? The cost of putting Beat, for example, there versus the cost of our rentals in the various places around town is much, much higher. And the other issue there, I'm not saying that this is a bad idea, I'm just saying these are the issues, is that right now, Beat is decentralized throughout town. Putting a centralized or more centralized facility at Newberry is going to raise issues with people. The idea of a pre-K to K, I actually like that idea. That makes sense. I mean, to put a K through 8 school, well, let me say, I'm intrigued by that idea. I don't know whether it makes sense, okay, because I haven't done the research. But to put a pre-K to 8 school there means that you're going to have a super campus of 3 schools, 2,100 kids, or whatever the number is. Now, during the Baldwin debate, some people started talking about, or talked about traffic congestion, and there's a big issue there. I doubt that it wouldn't be a big issue, at Newberry with a 9th school there. But you're not talking about a 9th school. You're talking about pre-K to K. And I think that's a good idea. It does create traffic problems, and I'd like to see if the people who are so upset about traffic at Baldwin would be upset about traffic here. And matter of fact, as you suggest, practically all the kids would, if not all the kids, would be driven to school. So I mean, that's a huge traffic jam. But it's an idea I think we need to look at. It makes sense to me, but I'm not an educator.
My family goes along with the monorail system in Brookline.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay, and how much is that override going to be? The idea of a magnet school, I love it, but I'm not an educator. I think magnet schools make a lot of sense, especially given, given the fact that today's world is a world of technology, STEM, high-level mathematics. To have a magnet school that's focused on those areas in Brookline, I think would be incredibly good for the community and good for actually the nation, because we'd be creating the foundation for kids to be able to move into these areas as they grow older. So no, I think that's ready. But and I know that at least the magnet school and actually all of your options, the school committee is looking at, they're agonizing over, they're struggling with. It's not easy to come up with a final solution, but it's on the table. And I like the magnet school. So, but that means nothing.
We have time for one more question. Make your comment. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Beth Cates, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. To follow up on Bob's comment about the magnet schools, I don't really like calling them magnet schools, but I read about something called the Urban Assembly Schools in New York City, and they are schools, lots of schools that center on a variety of subjects, from criminal justice to they have a green education school, and they were actually originally started to close the achievement gap and to serve minority students, lower income students, and to engage them, although the various subject matters of these schools don't necessarily, they're all over the place. It might be criminal justice, it might be green careers, it might be literature, arts, all of these things. So they really run the gamut. I urge you to Google Urban Assembly Schools, New York City, and check it out, because it's really engaging and inspiring. And we could do that here.
Last question.
I think I can speak from here loudly.
Okay, go ahead.
Andrew Fisher, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13.
It's for the TV, it's not really, okay? So if you can go over there, please.
Andrew Fisher, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13. Before I ask my question, I just want to make sure I understood something that you said in your opening remarks regarding the cost of classrooms at the Driscoll.
Right.
And you said it was $80 million to build 10 classrooms?
No, I said 108 million.
Or 108 million. And you said that was to build eight or 10?
Build a school that would give us a net of 10 new classrooms.
But that would also...
8 to 10.
Okay. But you could also say that would, in the cost of renovating a school that badly needs renovation would be $108 million, and we would also gain 8 classrooms.
One way of looking at it, it's not how I look at it.
So my question is, what would be the cost of the 8 classrooms when you consider that we're going to have to spend $100 or $108 million to renovate Driscoll anyway, and wouldn't it make sense to, if we're going to have to spend money to renovate Driscoll anyway, doesn't it make sense to proceed with that post haste when we talk about, I think you opened your remarks also talking about overcrowding and kids in inadequate space, and Driscoll is one of the places where that's occurring now. So that's going to need to be done now anyway. We can get 8 classrooms out of doing something we have to do now anyway. And doesn't it make sense to proceed with that right away rather than wait until we figure out where to fix the rest of the problem?
That's a popular position. I'm not sure I agree with it. It's something that needs a lot more study than we have done so far. We know that the program or the project at Driscoll will provide 10 classrooms in a new school, but that helps the Driscoll community. It doesn't address the town-wide problem we have, and there may be a better solution. Pam, let me finish talking before you... I'm being asked the question, please. There are other ways of addressing the problem. The main problem, not the main problem, one of the big problems, and the most immediate problem at Driscoll is the HVAC system. That can be fixed, and a certain level of renovation that's short of $108 million, or the larger amount that full renovation of the school would cost, could be a factor there. Alternatively, and actually I do support this, although I'm not sure how it would go over, if you want to build a new Driscoll, make it a 5-section school. That makes a significant dent in our over-enrollment problem. 4-section school doesn't, but 5-section school would. That creates other problems, I know, but again, these are all the things that we have to think through and try to resolve as we come to a solution to the problems that we have.
Thank you very much. Bernard, thank you very much.
Thank
you.
You.
And for your time, all right, and patience. All right. Okay, so now we're going to move on, and our next guest is going to talk about Coolidge Corner. But now, is it more than one person? All right, so I think that how about if we sit up at the dais, is that okay? Or do you want to do it one by one? Okay, okay, fine, that's good. Okay, please come up.
There's a lot of empty seats in the middle here for people that are sitting around the outside. If you want comfy seats, they're here.
Something got unplugged there.
No, I don't think so. Maybe this here. Yeah, right.
I just don't know what it does. It seems to me like it's damaged when it got kicked.
Yeah. Hold on.
But I don't know what that does. Maybe it does nothing.
Well, let's go see where it goes to. Yes, sir. You're welcome. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, okay, thank you. Let's see. Go ahead. Okay. And just for the record, this will be a presentation rather than a debate, okay? Just as Mr. Green made his presentation. So there isn't an opposition, but they're presenting what they see.
Do it now.
We work in the dark and do it.
And then the arrow keys are what I'm using.
I plugged it in. It's in.
Okay.
Just be careful. See it right there? See the...
Good evening. First of all, I'm Sergio Modigliani. I'm a member of the Coolidge Corner Study Committee, and I'm here with several of my colleagues who I will introduce shortly. And while this is a presentation, I do want to encourage the idea that we should have questions, and I'm going to encourage that you ask the questions along the way. And I may choose to answer you, or I may choose to defer you to one of the speakers that will follow, depending on the nature of your question.
Try to speak right into the microphone.
Okay? How am I doing that?
Yeah.
So, briefly, the articles that concern this particular project are these three articles. The first one is the actual zoning. The second is called a memorandum of agreement, which we'll explain briefly. And the last one is a tax certainty agreement. How many of you here served in town meeting during some of our prior projects? Like, for example, the most recent one that comes to mind might be River Road. Did any of you? Okay, good. So the reminder about this is in two parts. First, that tax certainty agreement is a device which ensures that should town meeting pass this zoning and the project go forward, no matter what happens in the future, that project is required to pay to the town the commercial tax rate that we would get under this proposal. So it cannot essentially, even if it converted to a not-for-profit or some other kind of a use, it would still be producing this tax, amount of tax. And that's the tax certainty agreement. You'll remember that from other projects. What is it that we're going to touch on tonight? Well, this is essentially the agenda, and it's a lot of items, and we don't have all that much time. And I want to focus on those things which you yourselves may be interested in or have questions about. But briefly, let me take a shot. The committee itself was a very interesting committee. It included town meeting members from the area. It included direct abutters and neighbors. It included a number of professional individuals. And it includes a number of representatives from various boards in town, just like what you'd expect. In addition to that, the last item that's listed there is an outside consultant. That was Pam McKinney. Pam McKinney has been advising on real estate in the Boston area for a very long time, is respected both by municipalities as well as by private developers. And she's the one who was testing the economic models for us. So essentially, we wanted on our side to make sure that we were not leaving opportunities or money on the table. And on the other hand, the developer was trying to make sure, and the banks were trying to make sure, that it remained a financially viable project that could go forward. And Pam was, I think, respected by both sides and performed a very useful service. And she does report to us, as well as to CHR, that we're right at that edge. We've really pushed this in a manner to have extracted the very best that we could get from the deal. So some of the issues that the committee was dealing with, and you can imagine that with a project of this type, it's a pretty complex set of factors that are involved. But the public realm was obviously an important issue. A lot of the concerns that town meeting has expressed in the last 3 to 5 years about sustainability, the nature of the environment, green issues, transportation issues, are reflected, we believe, in this project and have been incorporated to the best of our ability in the project. And of course, as you heard just a few moments ago from our chair of the select board, the town faces many financial needs. And this is a project that has a remarkably positive effect on our ability to increase our tax revenues. And you will hear more about that in detail. So those were just some of the highlights of issues. Now, I started off by reminding those of you who've been in town meeting a bit that this is procedure that we're following here is one that we're all very familiar with. It began with the Webster Street town-owned parking lot, which turned into the Marriott Courtyard, Brookline Place, and the Red Cab site on Route 9, the Cleveland Circle site, and most recently the River Road, all followed this basic approach of creating a working committee, working with the town and all the various officials, neighbors, abutters, and so forth, and crafting zoning. So tonight, fundamentally, and what you face in town meeting as a vote is a choice between two options. The first option that was originally presented was a 40B, okay? About 299 units, 12 stories high, a very massive presentation, which you will see here. I'll show it to you shortly. The committee felt strongly that this was a very poor use on this site. First, we know that we have a lot of 40Bs already in the North Brookline area. And second, this site is commercially zoned. And unfortunately, there have been other 40Bs recently that were also placed on commercially zoned areas with the effect that those go off the tax roll. They change from being commercial property. When they become a 40B, they become residential. They are lost to us from then on. And of course, you know that the difference here is that the residential tax rate, which is essentially 1, the commercial tax rate is about 1.65. So that's a very, very large differential. It's one of the reasons that this project we thought was very attractive, with the hotel and residential being proposed. But moreover, we know that 40Bs have a number of other problems, the most important one of which is that all of you in town meeting and all of the town boards and so forth basically lose control of the project. Here, what we're offering for you to vote is a 40A project in which we've crafted the zoning for the district and with your approval would pass. So that is the only choice for town meeting. It's either the 40A, which I will show you, or the 40B that I will show you. There are no other options. There are no other alternatives. We do not own this site. It's privately owned. So Yes.
What are the odds that if we don't approve this, he simply takes his ball and goes home and nothing gets built?
Well, it's unlikely. First of all, a reminder, the 40B process began already. It went through a number of reviews. It was reduced from its original 21 stories to 12 stories. But basically, for the developer to have any opportunity to unlock the value of the sites, they are going to proceed. And I think it's very clear that what we have right now is that CHR was willingly engaged in the process that we are in of trying to do the new zoning, because I think they actually would prefer this as well. But I can say with a very high degree of reliability that they have said publicly that should the vote turn them down, they will simply continue with the ongoing hearings at the ZBA for the 40B process.
You had said that when you build a 40B on a commercially zoned lot, that it goes to residential tax rate. What happens with 40Bs that have commercial on the ground floor? What tax rate is that at?
It's a little complicated, but you wind up with essentially a blend where those square feet that are commercial are taxed that way and that the residential is taxed residentially. So back to the 40B and the problems with the 40B. These are the four major problems that the committee was concerned about. And with a 40A, that is with the new zoning, we get town control, we get neighborhood benefits, we get the financial and fiscal impact of the much larger tax return, and we get many of the desirable environmental and sustainable goals that have been built in to this project. None of that is available to us if it goes 40B. All you could do as a town meeting member would be to go to the Zoning Board of Appeal and watch the procedures, basically, right? There's nothing else that we can really do in terms of shaping that kind of a project. So these four issues are the ones that I want to touch on just a little bit. So the first one was the town control. That's you guys. That's town meeting. It's our boards and commissions. It's our licensing procedures. And some examples of that are the fact that we have a procedure that large projects become designated as a major impact. That creates a design advisory team. We get a site plan review of the process by the planning board. There's a special permit process by the ZBA. I've already mentioned one of these items, which is called the Memorandum of Agreement, which I'll come back to. Design guidelines, which I'm going to also discuss. And moreover, there are ongoing monitoring opportunities that we have for all of our large projects, so that if there are problems downstream from traffic or from trash or from any of those kinds of questions, they are back before the boards every year to renew their license. And so it's an opportunity, again, to continue watching what goes on and to continue to assure that it's going the way we want it to go. None of that is available under the 40B. So I've mentioned a couple of terms. One of them is a memorandum of agreement. That's important because this is a side agreement between the developer and the town, and it contains some of the things that are very important to us, but we can't put in zoning. A good example of that is that under state law, there is a single building code with a single energy standard. If we wish a developer to exceed that standard, to be greener, to be more sustainable, we can ask that and get a commitment, which we have done, but it goes into this side agreement. It cannot go in the zoning. This is a really key point, right? So we have gotten the benefit of these sustainable and green goals, and they're in that memorandum of agreement. The design guidelines is another important point, and that is to remind you that I'm going to show you some images for both the 40B and the 40A, and I want to remind you that these are essentially images which are only suggestive. They're not a design project. They are accurate in terms of showing height, mass, and setback, but it's completely conjectural around design issues, windows, colors, materials. All of that would be yet to come should town meeting pass the zoning. Because then we're going to enter into this procedure of the major impact project designation, the creation of the design advisory teams, who are going to be working closely with the developer and the architect to actually make the final design. So remember, the images are to be thought of as suggestive and not final. Yeah?
The emphasis on the memorandum of agreement, are you saying that's less enforceable in the zoning, or you're just pointing out that that's a difference?
I'm saying that we have many important things that we as a town want, which are in that memorandum of agreement, but they're not in the zoning.
Okay. So are they enforceable because of that memorandum?
They are enforceable because it's a legally binding contract between the parties. Right? What was the word?
It'll go to record.
Yeah, it's recorded.
Once the Attorney General approves the zoning, then the memorandum of agreement goes to the registry.
So did everyone hear that it gets recorded, essentially, as part of the deal? So those are the town benefits, but even perhaps more important are the neighborhood benefits that have come out of this. And these include many things which relate to the public realm, which is just what you'd expect, pedestrian, open space, and circulation. But particularly I would point to all parking is underground, all of it. There's on-site bicycle storage. We got a design, which I think is a very interesting design in terms of the massing. We've been able to activate the ground floor areas with some retail spaces, which I'll talk about. The parking includes some spaces for adjacent residents, and the hotel has agreed to provide a meeting space for use by community groups. So these are just some examples. Yes?
So when you say hotel meeting space available to community groups, you mean at a fee, for free? I mean, under what kind of terms?
My understanding is basically that a legitimate community group can simply ask for the use of the room and schedule for the use of the room.
There's a cleaning fee charge. That's the only charge. There's no rental charge.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. That was a good one. So the site. I think most of you know the site. It's the heart of Coolidge Corner. It's made up of 3 parcels. It's owned entirely by CHR, and it has currently the 2 garage buildings and the surface parking lot. It happens to be in a number of zoning districts. So here's an image of the block. I think you can see the general layout here, but let me just see if I can use my high-tech tools. So here's Beacon, here's Harvard, right, and the block. Pleasant over there. And the site is outlined here, highlighted. So it's that portion of the block. Here is it seen from above with the zoning lines as they exist today. And the next slide should give us that's the highlighted portion of the site. Part of the zoning document that you will vote on cleans up the zoning lines that are in here now, which currently break this, so it becomes all one larger parcel that we can handle under zoning. I wanted to show you what we call a wireframe of what would be possible to build today under current zoning. This reflects the height limit, and you can see that it's in the 45, 50-foot range. You could get a little higher with what they're called public benefits. But this is kind of what it would look like. The dilemma is that our economic consultant, Pam McKinney, made clear to us that this has no possibility of ever being built because it's not economically viable. There is not enough of the program space on the site to make this possible with underground parking, for example. Just can't be done. So in essence, without changing the zoning, we are left with what is now a very blighted site, and the developer is left with a situation where they really can't go forward except by trumping the zoning with a 40B. Right? So this is why what we're doing right now, and this idea of getting the 40A and putting that into place, is so critical. We think. So the 40B, just to remind you briefly, it was about 12 stories, almost 300 units. It has significantly more parking associated with it. And as I mentioned, there's a comprehensive permit that's already pending. So it's not an idle possibility. Here is the 40B shown to you in a wireframe. Here are some possible images that show you a 12-story building that the 40B might look like. And there's a couple of these. Not a particularly desirable massing, in my opinion, and I think the committee felt strongly. So what is the proposal that we have, this mixed use or the 40A? It consists, as I mentioned, of the hotel. It's got different heights. It's a residential structure, 143 apartments, and all the parking goes underground. Here is the sort of diagram of the site that we looked at, the residential building at 13 stories with a penthouse, and the hotel, which goes from 2 and then goes to 8 and then steps up, and which might therefore, in wireframe, looks like that, and with some rendering, might look like this. This is taken from roughly Nina's lighting. We're looking across Beacon Street. Is everyone oriented? Yeah. Here's a site from a little further west on Beacon. The SS Pierce building is right here on the edge. Here we are sort of looking down the street here. This is, I think, Sussman. The Sussman building. The library is up the street here. And I think that's Pelham right there. And then you see the new building looming up. All right. So a lot has happened just in the last 6 months, really since last fall, November, December, which I wanted to just touch on very briefly, and which I'll probably point to. But we've been able to activate, the first item here is this Pleasant Street entrance. We've been able to activate an entrance at street level into the building, which we thought was important. There's a sunset provision that has been installed in the zoning so that if the developer chooses to not go ahead and file the building permit, their privileges will disappear. And I believe that is June of 2020 when it expires. So what if you pass it, there's a window of time during which the developer can act to file the permits for this project, and if they don't, the privileges go away. It's a sunset clause, right? Very clear. The parking, I think we've been able to do a number of things. We've picked up some of the spaces that from adjacent property and projects. But perhaps most important beyond the fact that it's underground is the last bullet point up here, which is that we've created a set of flexible regulations on the garage so that, first of all, it is what we call unbundled. That is, if you are buying a hotel room, you do not pay for your parking as part of the hotel price, and the same is true for the residential rental, which is not built in there. So if you want parking, you can have it, but you pay for it separately, and that means that because it's unbundled, any of those other spaces become available to other users, right? And that may change over time. So if you think about maybe in 5 to 10 years, we are less automobile focused, then those possibilities also allow for the parking spaces that are no longer needed to actually be converted to other uses. Yes?
I have a parking question. In one of the meetings I was at, there were merchants in Coolidge Corner that were asking if those parking spaces were going to would be made available to the public to park in Coolidge Corner the way they are theoretically at Marriott. And if there would be a public parking entrance that didn't require going through a private hotel lobby or anything like that to get to them, what's the status of that?
So it's my understanding that the answer to that is basically yes, that others will be able to take advantage of the parking. And how much is available, it's likely to depend over time and even, daily and by month, depending on what's going on. But the answer is basically yes. And the answer to the second question is that this mention right here of the Pleasant Street entrance, that is not in the hotel, and I'll show it to you on the floor plans. So it's directly accessible off the street. Some of the other things that were very important to the community, everyone expressed a desire to have some kind of a cafe or retail type of space at street level. We did not have that back in December. We now have that 1,200 square feet designated as a cafe or some other small similar retail at street level. And the second thing is that CHR themselves, hearing those requests, they are the ones who came back and they offered the idea, and they've included a co-work office space environment here of about 8,000 square feet. So this is a very nice amenity, we think, for not only some of the folks who are possibly in the residential building, but for the community. So it creates a kind of a true live-work opportunity where you can have a fairly small residential unit and then be able to take advantage. So that was very important. Another important point was that I'll show you there's a pocket park that's going to get converted. It's currently a surface parking lot, and we're going to get a park out of it. These energy use targets are an additional element of improving the energy efficiency above and beyond the conventional measures which we're using, which are LEED silver. And these targets are something being developed by the American Institute of Architects, and they are now working towards setting those up and getting them into place for the project. And we already mentioned the idea of this hotel room. Okay, so just to summarize, many boards have looked at this. You can see here that the committee itself was strongly in favor, and everybody that has looked at it up to now really has basically given us a very, very strong endorsement, which we appreciate. And I wanted to share these with you just to show you the kinds of diligence that has already occurred before this is coming to you. You are the final arbiters here. It's your final vote that determines whether or not this will go forward. So I had mentioned some things about benefits. Here's our site. There is a small existing park here with surface parking currently. Those spaces are 14 in number. They're going to be provided for within the underground parking garage. And that little park will turn into something. This is a sketch. It's not necessarily what they're going to do, because we've determined that the design of the park will be by our Park and Rec, even though it'll be paid for by Chestnut Hill Realty. So that's a nice feature. Some of the other things that we've talked about.
How big is that site, Sergio?
How big is the site?
Yeah.
6,000 or 7,000 square feet.
Yeah, roughly. Some of the other things that we thought are important are right here. This is the Brookline Booksmith. And there is an opportunity that we're exploring about linking the hotel lobby to the bookstore. This is an interesting idea for us because we've been looking as a committee to find ways to allow people to walk through what's right now a kind of a wall that rings the site, to improve the permeability of people who could walk on a shortcut kind of. And that's one opportunity that has emerged and is being pursued with CHR and the owner of the bookstore. There are public improvements. You can see trees and plantings and so forth, traffic improvements of various kinds that are being dealt with. So without touching on all of them. Here, just some quick images. This is a shot looking down John Street towards Pelham Hall. Here's the same view in reverse. You can see that the sidewalk at this end is far narrower than the sidewalk is up here. And so we have set back the new building such that instead of having this narrow condition that is there today, we will have this. So there's an additional gain here for not only trees but public space. Just an example of some of the things, so you can sort of sense this. And in addition to that, in the massing, you can see that there's sort of a reference being made to the presence of this building and sort of extends into the new project. Again, the details of the design shouldn't be looked at, but the concept has been identified. This shows you where the cafe is. It's here, and the workspace, the co-work space is here and also on a mezzanine directly above. There's a public street here, Waldo Street, landscaped. It's kind of a Wunderhoff concept that is cars and pedestrians and bicycles and so forth share this area in here. There is only entry traffic for service to this area in here and exit there as well for those trucks and vehicles that are doing this loop. But predominantly entry is in this area. Drop-offs in this area here. There's a queuing line here for Uber and taxis, and then 2 travel lanes, one in and one out. This is the entrance to the garage here, but the new public entrance that I had mentioned on Pleasant Street, here is a stair and an elevator off a lobby vestibule, which will go down to parking and also up to work space, as well as get you into the cafe. So this, I think, activates the sidewalk here and gives an opportunity for people to get in. Well, this is the same thing, just blown up, sorry. Right? Okay. Now, I'm going to turn this over briefly to my colleague Ken Lewis, who is a member of our committee and who has done a lot of the financial analysis to explain a little bit about the tax benefits.
Can I just ask one thing? Sure. Are there any affordable units in the overlay district plan?
Yes, there are, and we have another colleague, Roger Blood, who is a member of our committee, who will speak to that immediately after Ken.
One of the key factors that the committee looked at was the impact of the 2 development options on the town's finances. And there are really 3 key variables that impact the differentials in revenues, and the results are fairly significant. As Sergio already mentioned, our commercial tax rate is 1.64 times that of the residential rate in town, and that we currently have about 10% of our assessed value in commercial property. Those properties pay about 17% of the property tax. So it's a significant delta. 43% of the project in mixed use would be taxed as commercial property. That would include the hotel building and the 9,500 square feet of commercial space in the residential building. The second point is that the towns, by opting into the hotel occupancy excise tax, become de facto equity partners with the hotel owners in the sense that we collect 6% of gross room revenues. And that's a big factor as well. And then there's a more nuanced factor, which is the fact that the weighted average value of the residential building in the mixed-use project is higher because it has a lower number of affordable units on site, which Roger will explain is partially offset by the housing trust payment. Okay, sorry. And so the results of this, and we worked with Pam McKinney and Gary McCabe, the town's assessor. The resulting projections at stabilized occupancy for the mixed-use project is approximately $3.36 million. This is about $3 million higher. The current 3 parcels generate just a tick under $300,000 per year. That $3 million you can translate into bond capacity in the town. That's something equivalent to about $48 million at the town's current cost of capital over like a 25-year bond. It's also about $1.65 million higher than the same assumptions for the residential building, the 40B. And it's important to note that that would increase over time. Useful life of these properties is going to likely be easily 60 years or so. So it's a huge number when you consider the useful life of the buildings.
I'm going to ask the same question I asked last night, and I assume I'll get the same answer, but I think it's useful for people. Well, I mean, that's the hope. So the question is, you've got Marriott there, you've got the other place down the street, you've got this, you've got that. This is predicated on the fact that this place is going to be jammed with upscale hotel people or one thing or the other, and we're going to make out like bandits for change. So what happens if the hotel, if not so many people show up, and what was your response on that?
So the committee dealt with that question quite extensively. We did have access to 2 market studies prepared by some of the leading experts in hospitality evaluation, including the Pinnacle Advisory Group and HVS. We did use fairly conservative assumptions in our estimate of the occupancy tax revenue. We used 72.5% for the occupancy and $240 for the average daily rate, which generates a RevPAR of $175. This is pretty exciting stuff, but it does translate into a significant hotel tax of about $3,800 per room per year. And we feel that those are based on very reasonable and conservative assumptions, that those studies do take, in fact, into account the new hotels that are being developed not only in Brookline but in as well in Kenmore Square. Just finishing up here, the other components, you've already heard about the tax certainty agreement, locking it in. That's important in the sense that very unlikely, but if BU or BC or somebody would ever want to try to acquire the hotel for dorm space, they'd still have to pay the full commercial tax rate. 2 minutes, okay. Significantly, there's 156 fewer apartment units, and we all are aware that schools and libraries and parks and service represent over 60% of our operating budget, and that would translate into far lower demand for municipal services. And then we believe that hotels create vitality for the commercial district by particularly like midweek restaurant midweek restaurant patrons and other local vendors, hopefully the Coolidge Gordon Theater as well as the adjacent Booksmith. Are there any questions about this? Yes.
How is this going to impact those small business people during that construction in particular? It should be, I would imagine, very detrimental to small business people. Has that been factored into your negotiation?
Sure.
So I think town meeting members are aware that whenever we have a major project, there's a quite significant amount of work that goes into the actual project management, which includes, for example, where are the workmen parking? But at the same time, where are they eating, right? Where are they eating? They're going to probably be eating in some of our local eateries. And so I think the short answer to your question is that net, there's no question any construction project involves some disruptions. And have we quantified those in detail? I would say no. But I think we have confidence from seeing other major projects that we have done and which you yourself are familiar with, where we're able to do a pretty good job in terms of making that work for us and at the same time helping expedite getting the project built as quickly as possible.
My concern is that when they did the sidewalk on St. Mary's area, many little businesses went out of business because people couldn't navigate to get into those shops. So I'm not sure how this...
Well, one important advantage is, you remember from the site, this is internal to the block. So there are actually no commercial establishments inside there
Well,
to speak
I understand
of.
that, but you're going to have trucks, you're going to have all cranes, you're going to have all these things.
On the inside.
Sergio?
Yes.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks, and Regina, I actually talked to a half dozen business folks. Brookline Brooksmith, the vinyl shop, the flower. And, you know, they had some mixed feelings, but on the whole, they were enthusiastic. They thought it would drive more business to them. And I think, given the kinds of folks we're thinking about, for the hotel especially, but also people that are going to be living there, I don't think we're going to get, another Chase Bank. It seems to be growing like mushrooms in Coolidge Corner.
Question?
I mean, what we're talking about is actually construction during construction. But I have another point to ask about.
Sure.
Which is that we have received a letter from
We're
the
aware of
family
that. Yes.
regarding the superette, and I'm sure this goes for Jerusalem Pita too. They, Chestnut Hill Realty did not renew any of these leases. And in the case of the superette, they've been there probably longer than the Pita place. But, you know, this is a family business. It's been there for generations. And they are about to get kicked out with no compensation from Chestnut Hill Realty, and they will not be able to return, and they will lose whatever, you know, this was their nest egg. So they can't sell the business. There's nothing to sell. And how can we guarantee that we can at least get some compensation for these businesses that Chestnut Hill Realty is evicting in this?
So here's what I understand, that since Suni's letter was issued, and one of the things that she asked for in that was that she stated her family had received nothing in writing. It's my understanding that now they do have that in writing. But I think ultimately what I would remind us is these are tenants at will, and that
They weren't always, they had a lease.
this relationship between them and CHR, I think the committee's view is that this is really a private matter between the private parties. And we have certainly encouraged CHR to assure and reach out to do whatever they can with regard to those tenants. Paul, did you wish to add anything to that?
That's perfect.
So I'm going to jump back briefly, a reminder that this is a slide that just summarizes some of the environmental and sustainability issues that we had talked about. I think we've really hit most of them already. But I think these are all things that we gain from the 40A, which we don't get from the 40B. And now let's go to housing. I'm sorry.
Question on that topic.
Which one?
Sustainability.
Yes, I'll go back. Go ahead.
Scott Englander, Town Meeting, Precinct 6. You mentioned before that, of course, as would be the case for any project of this size, the transportation demand management plan would be entered into at some point. Can you describe what the process is for that and what transparency that will have for community involvement?
So it's my understanding that the TDM process is administered by the Transportation Department here in Town Hall, and that those are based on hearings in which they will seek or be told certain things that are necessary or appropriate for them to do. And I believe that all of you, the public, can attend those, and so you can follow and participate in that process and let the Transportation Board know what your views are. But it's that board which is in charge of the TDM.
You also have, under the 40A, an ongoing division which you can't have under 40B, that allows the town to review the TDM annually.
Yeah, it's again this notion of extended control. Yes? That is correct. Now,
Can we wrap this? You've got 1 minute?
I'm going to get off the podium here because I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Roger Blood, who is, among other things, chairman.
No, we've got 1 minute to go there, so.
Well, you can decide, Mr. Conquest, whether you want us to answer their question or we can leave.
Well, no, can you let Roger Blood
Absolutely.
finish up?
Can't do it in 1 minute.
How long is it going to take?
5, 6, 7 minutes.
Now, how about 3?
Okay. Well, I'm Roger Blood, and I served on the committee representing the Housing Advisory Board, the town's advocates for affordable housing. And the HAB, which is known as, is enthusiastically in support of this project. The board has 3 responsibilities: housing policy, administering a housing trust fund as trustees, and overseeing the inclusionary zoning in the town. And all 3 of those elements have come into play in this project, and we think in an interesting and a positive way. Normally, any project like this would come under inclusionary zoning. We require 15% of the 143 units to be on-site affordable. That would be 21 on-site affordable units. The HAB tried to, 2 goals was to have the most resources for affordable housing as a result of this project, but also to be sensitive to the other stakeholders' concerns. And one of the biggest concerns was the size of this building as it was proposed. And we and others were asked to find creative ways to make the overall height and massing of this building less. So 15% on-site affordable units very quickly would translate into 2 stories, the affordables being throughout the building. The bylaw lets the town negotiate alternative affordable housing outcomes so long as they're in the interests of the town and of the affordable housing goals. We eventually adopted a compromise where we recognize the community feels very strongly that large projects should have affordable housing throughout the project itself for economic diversity. But also that we could reduce one of the 2 floors and maintain on-site affordables and negotiate with the developer what we call a buyout of the remaining half of the units. So the end result is 11 affordable units will remain on-site throughout the building. The remaining 10 that would have been an obligation, we went through a negotiation which was rather complicated to get the equivalent financial value to be paid into the Housing Trust Fund. That figure ended up being roughly $3.3 million, which divided by 10 units is $330,000 in cash, a quarter up front and 3/4 upon completion, that the trust fund would be able to use to produce affordable housing elsewhere, subject to the town's priorities, working with nonprofit developers. The bottom line on all of that is that the trust fund's track record over a period of years in places like St. Aidan's, Olmsted Hill, Dummer Street, has been through a lot of other financing for affordable housing from state and federal sources. We have produced these units, successful projects that we hope we think, at about $50,000 a unit. We put in $9 million over the last decade and gotten 180 units of real affordable housing. So the leverage and the beauty of this outcome, if you will, is that for $330,000 per unit payment from the developer we, over a period of several years, and we already have opportunities, will be able to produce many more units than 10 affordable units in places and to serve people that the town wants to do in 3 or 4 or 5 times as many as the 10 units that will be bought out on the project.
Thank you very much.
Questions,
Thank you. Maybe you can ask questions of Mr. Blood at the end of the presentations from the next group. Thank you very, very much.
Just thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Conquest. Just remember that the concerns that were raised about, for example, the tenancy or construction disruption are perhaps not really the key question for you, because those would happen with a 40B as well. right? So this is really, I want to just leave you with this thought. I think this is a no-brainer vote here, that it's obvious that the 40A is a far better solution all around. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if there are questions, please let us know.
Right. Thank you. We just need the lights. All right, Chris, are you, what are you missing?
Thank you.
Thank you. What are you missing? Anything?
No,
Okay.
this is not our computer. I just
No,
want to
right.
make sure that the slide, the image will disappear, but I assume it will.
I actually don't think I have my thumb drive.
That's not going to work. Okay, fine. Then we have to dismantle this one and hook you up.
Unless someone else.
But you, what, does anybody have a thumb drive? You do? No, okay, someone's got,
I'm all set, Betsy.
how about the light? Oh, you,
30 seconds to transfer it.
okay. You might want to do something.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I am Chris Dempsey. I am the petitioner on warrant article 16. I'm a town meeting member from precinct 6. I live in Brookline Village. And I'm also the chair of the Brookline Transportation Board, which has endorsed this article. Article 16 intends to do two basic things. The first thing that it attempts to do is to help us improve parking management in Brookline Village, to try to make it a little bit easier to park in Brookline Village and to better manage that asset and that resource that we have. And it also creates a funding stream to invest in improvements in Brookline Village, to try to make Brookline Village a little bit more of a special place. It's already a wonderful place and a place where I'm really proud and happy to live, but it could use maybe that little extra oomph that makes it a little bit more special and draws more people into the commercial district. And we see the challenges of parking on the transportation board on a monthly basis. This is a representation of a typical conversation we might have before the transportation board. A neighbor might come in and say that he or she would like to have no parking zones created on each side of their driveway because it's too tight to pull in or out of their driveway. That's very common probably for many of you. And then another neighbor will say, well, no, you can't do that because I park there and I want to make sure I want to have that space available. You can't take that away. You can't turn that into no parking. And they might say, well, what about doing residential parking permits instead, and that will help ease the burden on the street. And then we'll hear from a shop owner who will say, well, no, you can't turn that into residential parking only. My customers park there, or my employees park there, and we need that space. And then you'll have an additional resident, some other residents say, well, no, I don't want that either because my guests park there, and so I don't want it to be residential parking. These types of challenges and this friction on parking is something that we see on a regular basis, and it's challenging for us because we don't always know how to weigh all the different opinions and views of the different stakeholders in an area, a congested, high traffic area like Brookline Village. So parking benefit districts are meant to try to solve these problems, and they've been a tool for municipalities like Brookline since the passage of the Municipal Modernization Act in 2016. Arlington, Massachusetts is the place in Massachusetts that has really most embraced these. They established their parking benefit district in 2017, and it's been very successful for them, and happy to talk afterwards about some of the interactions I've had with both residents and town employees in Arlington who have experienced the district. But we also have great examples in other parts of the country. Parking benefit districts have been around for decades. Most famously, Old Town Pasadena, which was one of the first communities in the country to adopt a parking benefit district. But also places like Boulder, Colorado, and Austin, Texas. I love this image in particular because it reminds me of Coolidge Corner with the neon sign for the theater in the middle of the block. So what would Article 16 actually do? Well, it actually doesn't really change any of these policies, except that it creates this advisory board for Brookline Village parking that would then make recommendations to the powers that be about parking policy. So this article, if passed, would allow the select board to create a parking benefit district advisory board of 9 people, at least 5 of whom represent businesses or merchants in the Brookline Village area. That advisory board then starts to meet, and they have public meetings that any of us can attend, and they start to study and talk about the parking issues in Brookline Village. They talk about things like parking meter rates, about locations of parking meters, about parking permit issues, about when spots are being used and when spots are not being used. That's a conversation that they have. And then they make recommendations to the select board about what changes they want the select board to make. And we're expecting that this is going to focus probably mostly on the rate for the parking meter. There may be other recommendations too, but it's probably going to be meter rates that are going to be the central part of their recommendation. So today, parking meter rates are essentially $1.25 at most meters across town. Some are more, some are less, but kind of the standard town rate at most meters is $1.25 per hour. And that money goes into the general fund. It doesn't stay in the district. Nothing really special happens with it. Under a parking benefit district, if that advisory board that's created of 9 stakeholders in Brookline Village, if they make a recommendation to increase the parking meter rates, let's say by 25 cents, then that 25 cents goes into a special revenue fund for the parking benefit district. So this does not touch existing parking meter revenue in any way. It only looks at incremental revenue above what the town is collecting today. And that revenue can be spent within the district, within the blue line in this map. The blue line is the district, the red triangles are the locations of parking meters. So some key governance points here. The first is that the advisory board that's created is purely advisory. It does not have any formal control whatsoever. It does not have any legal power other than to make recommendations. The select board retains the power to set parking meter rates, just as it does today. The select board has full control and retains full control under this. As I mentioned, this really only deals with increases, if there are increases, above the standard meter rate, and it would not impact existing funding streams. And for the funding stream that is created, the select board would have the authority to approve that. So that is also only done by elected officials in the select board. It's not done by this advisory board. The select board has voted 5-0 to support this article. The advisory board supported it 13-10. The transportation board had a unanimous vote of 6-0 on this. But I'm especially proud of the support that we have from local businesses in Brookline Village. Many of these are owned and operated by individuals. So HC Studio, Serenade Chocolatier, the Feet of Clay Pottery Studio, all that are important stakeholders in Brookline Village and all who want to see this happen because they feel it can make Brookline Village a more special and attractive place to be. And we also have endorsements from more than half of the town meeting members in precincts 4, 5, and 6, which are the core village precincts. And I think, again, I'm showing you this slide again because I think this is why fundamentally so many of those folks support this article, Warrant Article 16. Because this fund that is created can be reinvested, will be reinvested back into Brookline Village, into things that will make Brookline Village a more special place. Trees, planters, enhanced winter lighting, parklets, public art, more snow clearance if that's something that they want. It can be things that make Brookline Village work better and that make more customers want to come to Brookline Village, more diners, make it a better place to work and a better place to live. And I think there's a real opportunity here to do that with this commercial district. I've gone over the benefits again. It's about better managing the parking supply that we have. It's about providing local stakeholders with a voice. And it's about allowing this investment that we don't necessarily have today. And I think that's my last slide. And I think Harry is going to speak in opposition, so we'll let him take over from here.
Betsy, can we turn on a light or something?
I've been working on that here.
See about that. Don't make any promises. Do. It's over.
Thank you. So, I'm Harry Friedman, town meeting. I'm Harry Friedman, town meeting member from Precinct 12 and a member of the advisory committee, and one of the 10 people on the advisory committee who voted against this thing. I have basically 4 problems with this. The first is sort of practice and procedure. Chris was talking about how the extra quarter or extra parking revenue would be, there would be an advisory committee of local business people. They would advise the selectmen on how this money was spent in the village. Well, we have a system right now on how to spend money. It's called town meeting. Town meeting has the power of the purse. And when there are capital projects or other projects that are going to be built in the village or anywhere else, it gets put in the capital improvement project plan. It gets vetted by a subcommittee of the advisory committee, such as the capital subcommittee. It gets vetted by the advisory committee. And then the final vote, the power, is made by town meeting, not by the selectmen. The selectmen are the executive. They're not supposed to have the power of the purse. Town meeting has the power of the purse. This does a complete end run around the whole budgetary process that we've been using for hundreds of years, and that is the basis of the power of town meeting. My second issue is that when we do certain things in this town, such as set up a local historic district, you need to get 80 to 90% of the stakeholders, the people who live there, to approve it before the town will approve it. If you set up a business improvement district in the city of Boston, where the businesses tax themselves to clean up the area, you need a supermajority. If you want to do traffic calming on your street in this town, you need the lesser of 10 households or 50% of the street. There are approximately 123 first floor businesses in the village. Chris gave a list to the advisory committee of the 9 that endorsed this. And it turned out of those 9, 2 of them weren't in the parking district. If you're going to do something like this, you need buy-in. If you're going to do something where you've got a bunch of businessmen who are suggesting raising the parking fee, which doesn't tax them, you would think that 60, 70, 80, 90% of them would be in favor of it. We have a list of 7. And I think that's totally insufficient for putting through a major project like this. The third reason I'm against it is I think it's premature. The B2 projects by Children's Hospital are going in. They could have a dramatic effect on the fortunes of the village, bringing new employees and customers in. And I think before we do something like this where we raise the parking fees on people, that we like to see what happens there. And my final reason, if I can remember, is that I think this whole thing could turn out to be ineffectual. People go to shop at places because there are stores that they want to go to. You go to Coolidge Corner because of Booksmith, because of Trader Joe's, because of the theater, and a number of other businesses. I go to the village because I think there are plenty of good places to eat. I may go to Serenade Chocolates. Some people go to the children's bookstore. If you do not have businesses that draw people to your retail area, you can pour all the money in for street repairs and for parking meters and for flowers and for anything else, and it's not going to draw people in because it's the stores that draw people in. And if they want to organize, and if they have a sufficient body of stores that will draw people, then the village will be successful. But I don't think this is going to do it. So my 4 reasons against it were the ones I just stated. Thank you.
I'll have to take some questions, and if not, I can answer some of Harry's points, but questions are probably better, so let's do that.
Go ahead, right here.
Sure. Milan Lipinski, town meeting member from Precinct 7. I just wanted to clarify something.
Can you stand up, please?
Sure. So I wanted to just clarify one of the things that I didn't understand from Harry's reasons for opposing. This proposal will just enable this district to create a board that could, if they wanted to, increase the parking meter rates, but no one is saying that they necessarily would, or if they do, they could later reduce the parking meter rates because that experiment would have failed, presumably. Like I guess is it in your reasons not to do this is because you're assuming they already will increase the parking meter rates?
I'm assuming they will increase the rates because that's where they get the money to fund the programs that were the whole purpose behind the warrant article.
But if they were later to discover that that actually keeps business away by not attracting customers, then they would just decrease those parking meter rates.
Right, but then in effect you don't have a quote parking improvement district. You don't have anything. So I was assuming, Chris, that the whole idea was that they would be raising money to spend.
Yeah. So I think that's an important point, Harry. It's not the whole idea. The broader idea here actually is that you're pulling together a set of stakeholders in these 9 representatives of Brookline Village, at least 5 of whom represent businesses, but probably the other 4 representing residents, and maybe some of them representing both, because we have small business owners that both live and work in Brookline Village. And they're coming together for a conversation about how to make Brookline Village a little bit more special and a little bit of an easier place to park. And they may decide that they actually don't want to touch meter rates at all, and the only recommendation they're going to make to the select board is, here's a stretch of road that doesn't have parking meters today, and we want to add parking meters. Or the first thing we want to deal with is employee parking permits, because we're having trouble with employees parking on residential streets, and the employers are frustrated with their employees having to leave to change where their car is on a street. So they could spend 2 years just on that issue alone without ever making a recommendation to increase parking meter rates. The point here is really about creating a conversation that today doesn't really exist. To the extent it does exist, it kind of happens in front of the transportation board without us really having a way to formally manage that process.
But I would point out, we don't need to create a new law to have a bunch of merchants get together and decide what kind of ways they can improve the district. We don't have it in Coolidge Corner, we have the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association. Those are people who have gotten together on their own without the benefit of a PBB and have, made suggestions. We don't need this whole structure if the purpose isn't to generate funds by increasing the parking rate so that they can then spend the funds.
Can you just, wait, hold on 1 second, and can you please identify yourselves when you, ask your question? Thank you, go ahead, yes.
Oh,
Go ahead.
oh, I agree. No, you do. That's okay.
Okay. I'm Laura Darrell from Precinct 7. What can we assume about the businesses that are not listed up there? Did they not respond? Did you not inquire to them? Are they not in favor?
So, great question. So we have done a bunch of interaction with businesses, including a survey that we did in both paper form and online form that was distributed to somewhere between 80 and 100 businesses. We got 22 responses back from that, and there was some really interesting feedback that I'm happy to share more about. But to answer your specific question, we actually think that the responses we've gotten from small businesses are great. There's a whole set of small businesses out there that are totally reluctant to deal with town government in any way. They don't want to weigh in yes or no on this because town government is just sort of a black box for them. One thing we're trying to do with this, and I think you'll hear from at least one or two businesses on the floor of town meeting next week, is really trying to empower them to have more of a voice and have more of a say in meter rates and parking policy. Today they feel like that is policy that's done to them. When we create the parking benefit district, it's a policy that will be done with them. So I don't think you can make assumptions either way on support or opposition. There's been a very healthy kind of set of conversations. We've probably had 4 or 5 public meetings with probably a total of 15 or 20 businesses that have shown up. And the ones that I showed on the screen are the ones that have decided to proactively support. But we're not aware of any opposition at this point from Brookline Village businesses.
So I would add that once again, if you are proposing a local historic district for your neighborhood, and you go to the Preservation Commission or to town meeting, and you say, listen, there are 100 people, and we got positive responses from 22, it doesn't matter whether you assume the other 78 are for and against it is different. You won't get your local historic district because you haven't shown enough buy-in from the stakeholders.
So I want to address Harry's point here. I'm not an expert on historic districts, but my understanding is that historic districts truly change the rights of property holders because it restricts what they can change. We are not changing anyone's rights under any of this legislation. What we are doing is we are creating an advisory board that can make recommendations to the select board about a power that it already has. The select board could go out tomorrow and publicly notice a meeting to raise parking meter rates in Brookline Village, and then 48 hours after that, they could go raise the rates in Brookline Village. And they don't have to get 70% or 80% or 100% or 5% of support in that community because it's not a right that those businesses have. It's the right of the town to set this policy. And so this is just actually a way to give more voice than exists today, not less.
Hold on. I would just point out that if that's what's happening, you don't need this legislative structure to do it. The Board of Selectmen can raise rates, they can call a public meeting, they can encourage the townsfolk and the business owners to come, and they can listen to them. You don't need a PBD to do that.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess my question is,
Your name?
my name is Beth Cates, and I'm a town meeting member from Brookline. The parking conditions in Brookline Village exist in Coolidge Corner, in Washington Square, in St. Mary's, in JFK Crossing, in all of the commercial districts and local commercial districts in Brookline. And this would put one area of one commercial district in Brookline at an advantage over other commercial districts in terms of their leverage and revenue stream potentially. And I have a problem with that.
Yeah. So that's totally understandable. I think one of the great things about this is that this is a way for us to learn about parking benefit districts. And if it's successful, and I think that it will be, I think it'll be a smashing success. I think as soon as our next town meeting, we will have merchants from Coolidge Corner and St. Mary's and other Washington Square, other districts that have parking meters saying, you know what, that's working out great in Brookline Village and we want it to. And that's a totally appropriate thing for them to ask for, and we'll have that conversation. But we'll have a chance to learn.
Writing a warrant article for them too?
I would be glad to if they want that.
Hold on, Charles.
Yeah, Charles Carroll, precinct
one. Charles, hold on.
I get a response. Okay. And my response is that if it is done in another district, and it is successful, it goes to my first point, which is now you're raising hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, that is again not going through the town meeting process. It's going through the selection process.
Charles Carroll, precinct 1. Chris, could you speak specifically to the financial or other benefits from all these wonderful places that you mentioned, Boulder and Austin and Pasadena and perhaps even Arlington?
Yeah, so Pasadena literally credits their parking benefit district with saving their commercial districts. They put it in place in the 70s when downtowns were not the cool place to be and people were shopping at suburban shopping malls. And this idea brought people back to Old Town Pasadena. I literally don't think it's an overstatement to say that it helps save that commercial district. Now, Arlington is probably the most local and relevant example for Brookline. Their case is a little bit different because they did not have any parking meters in Arlington Center. And so they were facing lots of parking management problems for that reason. And so they said, we're going to create a parking benefit district, and the first thing we're going to do with the funds created is we're actually just going to pay off the cost of the parking meters. Brookline Village and other commercial districts in Brookline are going to be at an advantage because we've already paid for the parking meters. And so every incremental penny that's raised can go right into improvements in the district. We've spoken with, mostly with town staff in the town of Arlington, including a conversation that I had with the town manager in Arlington, and he said that it's been a great success. He said he would recommend it to any community, and in fact, he's done so personally to Melissa Goff at the Mass Municipal Association meeting that was held, I think, late in the fall of last year. He said, this has been working great for us, and Brookline should do it too.
Yes, right here.
Hi, my name's Lorraine, new town meeting member from Precinct 16. I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out, when you talked about like this literally saved Pasadena, what does that literally mean? Because right now it feels like it's flowers. And flowers are great, but how does that save the downtown?
So it does two things. What you had in a place like Pasadena, which I think also when they created this didn't have parking meters, is people who were parking on the street all day and taking up spaces so that customers were being driven away. And we've heard in our surveying that we've done with small businesses that they have the concern that, and in fact they've gotten calls from customers who have said, I circled the block 5 times looking for parking, I couldn't find any, I gave up, I'm not coming back. The way this fixes that is because, or helps that, I'm not going to claim that it's going to be, instantly perfect to park in Brookline Village, but because it better manages that parking supply. So here's an example, or another data point. We surveyed the businesses, and of the 22 that responded, we asked them this question. We said, you have to choose between option A and option B. Option A is, it's too hard to park or too difficult to park in Brookline Village. And option B is, it's too expensive to park in Brookline Village. 100% of the responses chose option A. It's too hard to find parking. And that's not scientific evidence, but it probably points us in the direction that our parking meter rates are a little bit too low. And that if they were a little bit higher, it would encourage more turnover and free up more spots, which would make it easier to park. The rule of thumb that transportation planners use is that they want somewhere between 80 to 90% of the spots on a block to be filled at any given time, meaning there's always a spot available for someone to use. And so this moves us in that direction. And I'm not going to claim that if it went up a quarter an hour, that's instantly going to cause all this turnover, but it sort of moves us in the right direction. And then just in terms of the investment side, flowers are not necessarily going to make people go to Brookline Village instead of Brigham Circle or Coolidge Corner or Harvard Square, but it can help on the margins. It can help, maybe you go to dinner and then you decide, you know what, I'm looking for some dessert and I'm willing to walk around the commercial district because it's so pleasant with the flowers. Maybe the money is spent on winter lighting to draw more people into Brookline Village when it's dark in the winter. Maybe it's spent on special public art. You could see this money being used on what's the word I'm looking for? Not statues, but sculptures. Thank you. Sculptures that draw people in. Temporary sculptures. You could put. You've seen places that have put out pianos and for 3 months at a time in the summer, and people can play the piano. Those are the types of small things that actually cost relatively little money that start to make a place feel more special and more unique and make you want to come back again.
So I would point out that if your theory is that raising the parking meter rate makes parking easier, and I don't dispute that, the selectmen can do that tomorrow. You don't need this legislative structure to do it. Second of all, the piano example is very good. We had them a couple of years ago, all over town. It didn't require a parking district.
Tony, please.
Tommy Vitolo, Town meeting member, precinct 6.
Can you speak up?
Loudly.
I'm doing the best I can.
And come up to the microphone.
Nice fight, Tom.
Tommy, as if you've ever said no to a microphone. Come on.
Tommy Vitolo, state representative, and my kids go to school in Brookline Village, and I'm here a lot. And oh, geez, I'm doing the best I can. My question relates to the businesses and what's a business and what's not. It seems to me the business in the parking benefit district that has the most customers every day is the St. Mary's School. I pay to send my 4-year-old there. Don't tell me it's not a business. And they get lots of people. And my question is between folks like St. Mary's and the Brookline Community Foundation, heck, the Elks Lodge, Pierce School, Town Hall, the police department, and fire. There are a lot of places that are part of the fabric of Brookline Village that are certainly not for-profit businesses. Do they count toward any of the 5, or are they relegated to the other 4? And I say this as a member of the Joint Committee on Small Business and Community Development. I'm certainly supportive of the businesses. I just wonder how broadly we define a business in the context of this, given that there are so many people walking around in Brookline Village who aren't there to spend money at a for-profit business, but are there to do other things, and so surely they would want a pleasant experience as well.
So I think the language does say businesses or managers managers of businesses. I'll have to pull out the exact language. So I'm not sure that it has the flexibility necessarily to include not-for-profit or town institutions. But the hope would be that the select board would appoint a pretty diverse mix to those 9 seats, and it's part of the reason it's a slightly larger board than you might expect. You certainly want different types of uses. You want to make sure that you're getting people that are using parking during the day, people that are using it at night, people that are using it on the weekends, people that are there for very short periods of time, like a dry cleaner, and people that are there for longer periods of time, like someone who's at a school or an employee at a post office or something like that.
1 or 2 more. Regina, go ahead, please.
What is the clout of that district advisory board in saying this is what we want and having that clout with the Board of Selectmen? And I've heard the town administrator present the budget and talk about how important increasing the parking is for the budget. So you're asking them to put it to cosmetic kind of things when I know that it hasn't been done that way yet. So what's the clout here?
So the clout is purely advisory. The select board appoints these folks, and then they make recommendations back to the select board. There is no legal authority for this board at all. I think the thought is the select board are appointing these people, and they're representing Brookline Village stakeholders. They're likely to take the recommendations of those stakeholders, but they certainly do not have to. To your question, and I think it's a really important one, Regina, your broader question of, well, what about the need to use parking meter revenue for town needs? This does not diminish that in any way. The select board can still raise rates at will as they want to, and they can send those dollars into the general fund just as they do, those quarters, so to speak, and dimes and nickels, send them into the general fund just as they do today.
Kate Becker, Precinct 3. Could you say a little bit more about the process by which projects would be selected and prioritized? And then to Harry's point, could you say a bit about whether there have been any legal challenges to this in other towns, as town meeting traditionally holds purse strings? Are there any similar precedents?
So to your second question, Kate, this is a Mass General law. So there's not a legal threat to this because the legislature has said this is a power that towns have to create boards like this and to make these decisions. There is a choice, in fact, that towns have about where on the spectrum or how on the spectrum they want to govern these funds. They can decide to have town meeting approve these funds on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, This law actually allows these funds to go to a nonprofit organization or nonprofit corporation with no input from elected officials at all. I will tell you that the businesses in Brookline Village would much prefer that. They would much prefer to be able to create a nonprofit and have these funds deposited directly in there with no more town say. I know Harry and others would much prefer that town meeting retain full control and it go through the town meeting process. This is a little bit of a Goldilocks situation where we say, look, we want to give this board enough sort of independence and efficiency that it feels like it doesn't have to go before town meeting and the advisory committee every 6 months to justify this funding. But at the same time, we actually want elected officials representing the town to have the final say on whether these funds should be spent. And so that's why we ended up with the select board as kind of the compromise.
Last question, last, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Christy Electors, Precinct 7. Christy Electors, Precinct 7. So my question is, Harry talked about that we have other mechanisms, but my question is, what mechanism does the town have right now for a community like Coolidge Corner to actually spend money on improving their district? And has how do we have any group processes that the Coolidge Corner goes and talks to the town and says, hey, we'd really like you to do X, Y, Z? And by opening this TDM, will we have open meetings where community will know that they can come and talk to voice their opinion? Because right now I found that I don't know where to go to say, like, this is my vision for what I want. I also live near the village, so this would be great. It would be great if we had a parklet outside the ice cream shop so we can hang out. Because right now there's nowhere to hang out in my village. Well, there's one little spot. But yeah, so we could just talk about like what opportunity. To me, it sounds like something new. I had not heard of anything that I could do that within my village. But
Harry, you want to answer that? Because it's really to you.
Right now, we have the capital improvement program. And so, for instance, items that have been on the capital improvement program was to do work on one of the alleys at Coolidge Corner that connect the business district. You could have capital improvement program for street furniture, for sculptures, for things such as this. This is part of the process now on how you go about doing capital projects in any part of town. And so the process exists.
so we could get recommended.
They will get recommended. You could recommend it to one of the selectmen or to the capital subcommittee for capital advisory to put this on the schedule for capital improvements.
So it's just piecemeal. It's not.
Yes.
It's not a group.
Well, it's a group thing because when the town looks at the CIP, they can't do it all in 1 year, right now, everywhere. So they get sort of grade them. And some of them get done this year, some next year, some in future years. And you, as a town meeting member, have the ability to move a motion, an amendment to the budget, to move something up. You have that power.
So what I would say, Christy, is Harry's not wrong at all, but you can imagine if you're a small business owner that's trying to make ends meet and keep customers coming in the door and manage all your finances, Harry's explanation of the process is not exactly inspiring. Doesn't exactly say, okay, well, I'm going to contact the town meeting members, wait 3 years through the SIP process, hope that it gets voted for. This is a much more direct way to really empower these folks, and that's why many of them are really excited about it. And to your other question about about these meetings being open, yes, they would be open and publicly noticed. And we would hope that not only would members of this advisory board include town meeting members, maybe you would want to serve on it, but that then members of the public would show up at these meetings and have a chance to weigh in. Maybe they would present 4 or 5 options to the community about different types of public art or plantings versus public art versus sculptures, and members of the public could weigh in on those options before they make their final decision.
So we're just going to let the speakers have a 1-minute summation, if that's okay, Harry?
Yeah, so my 1-minute summation is I think this idea is not yet ready for prime time. It's not a bad idea. And if this were to come back to town meeting and instead of the selectmen doing the dividing of the money, town meeting approved where the money was spent, and if there was greater buy-in from the business community beyond the 7 that have done so far, because there are, as I said, 123 storefronts. I could contemplate being in favor of this, but the way it's structured right now, I don't think it's ready for prime time.
So I think the reason that the select board supports this 5-0, that the advisory committee supports it, that the transportation board supports it, that more than half of the town meeting members in precincts 4, 5, and 6 support it, is because we see the opportunity that it has for making improvements to a place that we all really care about and that we want to make more special than it is today. And this is a real opportunity to kind of bring that set of stakeholders together in a way that they're not really together today. And hypothetically they could be, but the reality is that they're not. To empower them to have a little bit more choice over what happens, and hopefully to create a place where it's a little bit easier to park and it's a little bit more special to shop or to dine or to live or to work. This is something that has worked well in peer communities around the country and even here in Massachusetts, and we think it's time to give it a try here in Brookline Village.
So I just want to thank Harry, I want to thank Chris for a wonderful presentation. And I'm just going to bring Betsy back up again to, no? The most important thing, thank the people that supplied the victuals, all right? And I think that's the Brookline Neighborhood Association. And again, thank the TMMA and the League of Women Voters for hosting this, and look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday. Thank you. Good night.
Long time no see, Larry. How are you? Nice to see you. Congratulations. I think so. Yeah. Because, as I said, the merchants